June 2000, Athens, Greece. A two-story house behind a low iron gate, somewhere in the northern suburbs. Sunlight crossing a child's bedroom window at the hour most families are getting ready for school. Nothing about the scene would make anyone look twice, until you realize it isn't moving. What you're looking at is a photograph, taken from a parked car across the street. The man holding the camera lowers it from his eye and checks the frame he just shot. He is not a tourist, working through a roll of film on vacation. He has done this before, for other houses and other windows belonging to other people, and the men he answers to have never once been caught doing it. On the seat beside him sits a folder. Inside it, a name, a face, a route to the embassy, a route home, the hours a family keeps without knowing they are being timed. A target package, built the way this particular cell has always built them, patiently and from a safe distance. Weeks go by, nothing happens. Then something does, only it does not happen to the man in these photographs. It happens to his neighbor instead. Somewhere inside that mistake sits the answer to 3 questions that will not let go of you for the next 40 minutes. How does a man survive being marked by people who have a 20-year record of never missing? Why that particular morning, and not any of the 100 mornings before it? And whose name was actually written at the top of the file they had been working from all along? To understand how that folder came to exist, you have to go back further. Before Athens. Before this story had a name attached to it at all. A graduate seminar room at George Washington University, sometime in the mid-1980s. One professor in particular has a habit of singling out his most observant students for extra assignments outside the normal coursework. He asks this one to put together a short character study of someone close to him professionally, his own supervisor, in this case, framed as nothing more than a writing exercise in close observation. The work that comes back is sharper than the assignment really called for. It picks up on details about how people perform confidence versus how they actually feel it. That, it turns out, is exactly what was being measured. The professor was never simply a professor. He moonlights as a psychiatric consultant for the Central Intelligence Agency, and for months, he had quietly been sizing up this particular student as a recruiting prospect. The character study was the final piece of an evaluation that had been running the entire semester without the student knowing it. What follows is not dramatic. There is no recruiting poster moment, just a conversation, a handshake, paperwork to read and sign in a plain office somewhere off campus. He says yes, not because of the salary, not because of any taste for danger. He says yes because, at 22, he genuinely believes in the idea of the work. An agency built to protect the country from things it cannot see coming. A calling, not a career. There is no single ceremony that marks the change. He finishes the degree. He goes through training most people never hear about, and never will. He learns to write reports a certain way, to read a room a certain way, to treat his own instincts as data, rather than feeling. By the time he is in his late 20s, the agency is no longer something he joined. It is closer to a second family, one with its own language, its own loyalties, and its own very particular idea of what loyalty is supposed to cost. The years between that handshake and Athens are spent the way most careers inside the agency are spent. Language work, rotations through smaller stations, the slow accumulation of trust that eventually earns a case officer harder and more sensitive assignments.
Understood, sir.
He builds a reputation early for being careful, rather than flashy. The kind of officer a station chief hands a delicate problem to, precisely because he will not do anything reckless with it. By the late 1990s, that reputation has hardened into a posting. Athens, working under official cover, out of the United States Embassy. One of the more exposed assignments the agency gives a case officer in Europe that decade. He does not know yet what that belief is eventually going to cost him. Nobody explains that part during the handshake. Nobody ever does. Greece, at the turn of the millennium, is not a posting people ask for twice. For 2 decades, a homegrown Marxist militant group, calling itself 17 November, has been killing Western officials across the country. CIA station personnel, American military attachés, diplomats from half a dozen NATO governments. They are patient. They study a target's habits for months before they move. And in 20 years of operating in plain sight,
In a city of several million people, not one member of the cell has ever been identified, let alone arrested. You do not need a briefing to understand how seriously the agency takes that threat. You can read it in the small, unexplained adjustments it makes to one officer's daily life. 3 firearms kept inside the house. An armored sedan parked where an ordinary car used to sit. The children's school route changed every week on a fixed schedule, quietly, with no real conversation offered about why a route to school needs changing at all. None of this is precaution against something theoretical. Somewhere in that same city, a cell with a flawless 20-year record is doing exactly what it has always done in the weeks before it kills someone. Watching from across a street, timing a commute down to the minute, building a folder. Officers who have served that posting before him talk about it the same way, almost word for word, when they talk about it at all. You stop noticing the precautions after a while, the way you stop noticing a seatbelt. That is precisely what makes the posting dangerous. The danger has been there so consistently, for so long, that it eventually starts to feel like weather instead of a threat. Day to day, the work itself looks almost ordinary from the outside. Meetings logged as cultural affairs functions. Sources met in cafes that double as cover for something else entirely. A diplomatic badge that opens doors a tourist's passport never could. Underneath that ordinary surface sits a much simpler fact. Every relationship he builds, every contact he develops, is being watched by people on the other side who are very good at watching and very patient about acting on what they see. And in that same period, without his knowledge, a folder with his own name on it is already sitting in someone else's car. June 2000. A senior British defense official leaves his residence for the morning commute, the way he has 100 mornings before this one. He does not reach the embassy. The method matches what investigators have seen from this cell before. Close range, no hesitation, no trace left behind. 17 November. Doing what it has always done, with the same precision it has always done it with. What does not become public knowledge for a long time afterward is whose folder that operation actually began with. The target package was never originally built around a British diplomat. It was built around an American case officer working out of the embassy. The man who, years later, the world will come to know as John Kiriakou. He survives by what amounts to an accident of timing, a morning routine that, by sheer chance, did not line up with what the watchers were expecting that week. A set of agency precautions, doing the quiet, unglamorous work they were built to do, and a margin of luck nobody in the building is comfortable writing down in an official report. The fear does not arrive all at once, in a single dramatic moment. It moves in slowly, afterward, in the weeks and months that follow, in a marriage that does not survive the posting, in a silence that settles over a house that used to feel ordinary. In the specific way, he starts checking mirrors and doorways out of habit, rather than necessity. He keeps working anyway. Then, on a clear Tuesday morning, 15 months later, the entire shape of the war changes for everyone,
I volunteer for
all
the
at
most
once.
dangerous
He
assignment
walks into the agency the following day
I am ready
and
to
asks for the
deploy
most dangerous
immediately.
assignment available. They give it to him. He flies into Pakistan within weeks. The agency is hunting the men responsible for the attacks, and near the top of a very short list sits a Saudi-born logistics coordinator, believed, at the time, to be Al-Qaeda's third-ranking figure, Abu Zubaydah. For months he is nothing but a name on fragments of intercepted communication, a presence that moves between safe houses, never staying anywhere long enough to be pinned to a map. Then, in March of 2002, the agency finally gets a thread worth pulling on. 14 safe houses, hit at the same instant, across 2 different Pakistani cities, in a single coordinated operation. Kiriakou is part of the raid team. What follows reads less like a planned operation, and more like a scramble in the dark. Doors breached at the same instant in 2 cities.
Upstairs is clear.
A dozen radios talking over each other. Plaster dust and the smell of cordite filling narrow stairwells. A tall man seen leaping between rooftops in nothing but his pajamas, before a Pakistani officer brings him down 3 rounds. He is hauled, gut-shot, and fading in and out of consciousness, into the bed of a pickup truck, and for a stretch of time afterward, nobody on the ground is fully certain they have the right man. There are no usable fingerprints to take in the field, no clean photograph of his face to compare against the file. What there is, buried in an old surveillance folder from an earlier operation, is a single photograph of one ear. Kiriakou kneels beside him on a hospital bed, hours later, gently lifts the hair back from the side of his head, and lines up what he is looking at against that old photograph. It matches. Of every Al-Qaeda detainee the United States captures across the entire war, none will ever outrank the man bleeding out on that table. A firefight breaks out at the hospital that same night. Gunfire in the corridors. The building briefly under siege from outside. At some point in the hours that follow, the wounded man, drifting in and out of consciousness on the table, asks Kiriakou, through an interpreter, to finish it. To press a pillow over his face, and let him die there. Kiriakou says no. The agency, at this point in its history, wants this particular man alive more than it has wanted almost anything else. Back in Washington, he is treated like exactly what the institution wanted him to become. 10 separate performance commendations across his career. A seat on the counterterrorism desk. Responsibility for the Iraq portfolio during the run-up to the 2003 invasion. Drafting analysis that lands on desks far above his pay grade. Eventually, the job of walking into the Oval Office most mornings to brief the President of the United States personally on the state of the war. A routine so regular, it stops feeling like an honor, and starts feeling like a job. Early mornings, a leather folder, a 15-minute window with the most powerful man in the country, then back to the building to do it all again the next day. Whatever this story turns into later, it does not begin with an outsider holding a grudge. It begins with the institution's favorite son. Which is part of why, on an ordinary afternoon in the agency cafeteria, when a senior officer pulls him aside with an offer to train him in something new, he actually stops and listens instead of walking past. He does not yet know what the program is called. Neither,
we have reason to believe the senator's assets are
does
tied to the
anyone
offshore
watching.
accounts, and our
The
intel
offer,
points to a direct
once
connection
it is
between him and
finally
the
spelled
cartel's
out in plain
financier.
language, carries a name the agency prefers in
I
writing.
have something for you.
Enhanced interrogation. Strip away the phrasing.
What is it?
And what is actually being described is waterboarding, sleep deprivation, stress positions, and a handful of related techniques folded together into a single sanitized line item. He does what he generally does before answering anything that matters. He goes to a mentor, a former supervisor he trusts completely, and lays the offer out exactly as it was given to him. The answer that
You
comes
need to
back is
understand
blunt,
the consequences
and it
of
does
this
not
program.
take long to deliver. In the
It goes
mentor's
much
view,
deeper than you
the program
realize.
sits on the wrong side of both the law
You
and
understand the
basic
weight of
decency,
this.
and anyone with sense would walk away from it. Because
Yes,
the
I do.
officers who agree to run it will spend the rest of their careers as the agency's insurance policy, the names everyone else is counting on, to absorb the blame if it ever surfaces. He turns it down. He assumes, for a while, that a quiet refusal like that simply disappears into a file somewhere and is never mentioned again. It does not disappear. Within 30 days, a promotion he had been quietly counting on goes to somebody else instead. The justification typed onto his personnel file uses language he will carry with him for the rest of his life. Insufficient dedication to the counterterrorism mission. The same officer who identified Abu Zubaydah by the shape of his ear is now, on paper, not committed enough to the fight against terrorism. In 2004, he resigns from the CIA. For a while afterward, he genuinely believes he is walking away with a clean record and an ordinary civilian life waiting for him on the other side of it. _ 3 years pass. Late autumn, 2007. A reporter from ABC News calls him with a question
Good
That
evening,
does
Mr.
not
Morel.
sound like a question.
I have some information
The
regarding
kind where the
guarding
person
Grove.
asking
What is this?
already has most of the answer
We
and
need
is
to
only
control the
checking the
narrative,
last piece.
redirect the blame,
Inside the agency,
ensure
a
plausible
small circle
deniability.
already understands something Kiriakou is only beginning to suspect. For years, the
What did he
CIA
say?
had recorded hundreds of hours of footage from Abu Zubaydah's interrogations on videotape. Someone, recently, has run those tapes through an industrial shredder on purpose. Days before the New York Times is set to report
The
that the tapes
allegations
ever
state you
existed
directed
in
a
the
covert
first place.
operation.
That's a
Destroying
lie.
evidence like
Who is
that
my
is its own
source?
separate crime.
Tell me right now.
And a crime of that
I never
size needs to be
participated in that
buried under
program.
something else, or behind
You have the wrong
someone
information. I was never
else. The reporter
there.
tells him gently that a senior official has named him to ABC as one of the men who personally carried out the interrogations. He never went through the training. He was nowhere near any of the interrogation sessions.
The Eswithatsign and Satan, sitting at home, Kiriakou understands exactly what is happening around him. The institution needs a face for this scandal, and his is being measured for the part whether he agrees to it or not. He has, by his own read of it, exactly one move left available to him. In December of 2007, he sits down for a national television interview and says something no one inside the United States
We must
government
acknowledge
has
the
ever said out
consequences.
loud on camera before. That the
Pain.
CIA tortured prisoners, that Abu Zubaydah was
Responsibility.
waterboarded, that the program
you
was
last night?
authorized at the highest levels of the government,
talk to you.
and that the honest word for what happened
Not sure
is
yet,
torture,
waiting for confirmation.
not technique. He believes
The data
every part of that
indicates the
sentence,
projected
and
impact
most of
would
it
have been
is
minimal,
exactly true.
with a very low
But in the same
probability of
breath, he
catastrophic
also repeats
outcomes.
one specific detail, precisely as it was briefed to him years earlier inside the building, that Zubaydah broke after a single waterboarding session lasting 35 seconds. That figure is worth remembering. 7 years from this point, it will resurface, and it will not say what he thinks it says. For a few weeks after the broadcast airs, he allows himself to believe he has told the truth and survived telling it. Then the Justice Department opens a formal investigation, and the man assigned to lead it turns out to be someone he already knows by face. A former colleague from inside the same building, on the other side of the table now. That first investigation drags on for months, and ultimately produces nothing chargeable.
To that?
A declination letter arrives, the document that formally closes a case. He and his wife go out to dinner that night to mark it. They are both certain it is finally over. It is not over. A change of administration in Washington shifts the entire landscape underneath him. A man named John Brennan, a senior officer who sat inside the agency through the years the torture program existed, and who signed off on the paperwork authorizing it, begins moving steadily toward the director's chair. To Brennan, Kiriakou is the officer who walked onto national television and put a name to a program the agency would rather have kept classified forever. To Kiriakou, Brennan is precisely the kind of person who should have been answering questions in a courtroom, not climbing toward the top floor of the building. The case reopens, and this time, it stops being procedural.
Keep him
A source
isolated.
later confirms, on the record, that a senior
got nothing
officer
to
bragged
connect me.
openly that the agency was going to take
Not
Kiriakou down, in close to those exact words. Investigators start pulling everything they can legally request: phone logs, banking records, years of saved correspondence. At this stage, they are not, by any honest description, building a torture case. They are looking for any chargeable offense at all, on any subject, and eventually, they find one. It is small, and it is old. A journalist working on a book about the agency had once asked him, years earlier, whether a particular name in a draft chapter belonged to a CIA officer. He confirmed that it did. The reporter never printed the name. No operation was compromised. No one, by any measure, was harmed. The statute used to prosecute that kind of confirmation, though, was never written with harm in mind. It cares about the act of disclosure itself, and a disclosure, technically, is exactly what occurred.
In January of 2012, the indictment arrives, 5 separate federal felony counts, stacked together, carrying a combined maximum of 45 years. He is 47 years old, with 5 children, the youngest of them a newborn. If the case goes to trial, and he loses, his children reach middle age before he comes home, and he himself becomes an old man inside a federal facility. His oldest is still in grade school. None of them are old enough yet to understand what a felony indictment actually means, only old enough to understand that something in the house has changed. He becomes only the second person in American history charged under that particular statute. The first was a Cold War-era operative who sold the names of American assets to the Soviet Union, and people died as a direct
I
result.
understand.
He is now being weighed on roughly the same legal scale for a single yes or no confirmation that hurt no one at all. The choice placed in front of him is built to look like a choice while functioning like a trap. Fight the case at trial and risk decades behind
Decades in
bars,
prison.
with 5 children left to grow up almost entirely without him. Or accept a plea agreement, 30 months in federal prison, a permanent felony record, the end of a pension built across an entire career, and at least come home again while his children are still young enough to remember him clearly. At 6 o'clock in the morning, on the day the plea deadline finally closes, he signs it. He calls his wife.
Yes.
He
July
picks a
23rd.
surrender date off a calendar,
23rd, okay.
like a man scheduling a routine procedure.
I'll be there.
In that same week, the United States Senate formally confirms John Brennan as director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
You need to
His
understand the
attorneys
terms
have
are
already
absolute.
told him, and he has already told his
Kids,
children, that he is headed to a
there's
minimum
something I need to
security
tell you.
camp. Open dormitories, no perimeter fence, something closer to a converted college campus than a prison. When the actual assignment paperwork finally arrives, it sends him somewhere else entirely. FCI Loretto, a higher security federal facility in the hills of Pennsylvania, his file flagged, so that any contact with members of the press has to clear the warden's office first. It reads, by any reasonable interpretation, less like an administrative oversight than a message. From inside Loretto, he starts writing anyway. Long, deliberate letters addressed to the outside world, describing the facility, the institution that placed him there, the men he is now serving time alongside, smuggled out a handful of pages at a time, and shared until they become something close to a running column, under one name, the Loretto Letters. Prison does not sort people the way the outside world assumes it will. A number of inmates serving long sentences for organized crime convictions notice the new arrival early on, a former intelligence officer who clearly has no idea how to navigate a place like this, and just as clearly is not pretending to be tougher than he is. Rather than freezing him out, they start including him. A seat saved at a table, an explanation of which guards to avoid and which ones to ignore. Eventually, contraband ingredients combined into something resembling an actual meal, prepared in a shared bucket because there is no kitchen to speak of. The whole
Chuckles.
production treated as a kind
A
of
bit of
running
home, eh?
joke about how far
Soft
each of them
laughter.
has fallen from
Not
wherever
quite,
they
but
started.
it'll do.
It is not friendship exactly. It is closer to a recognition. The system put all of them in the same building, and inside that building, looking out for each other, is the only thing nobody can take a felony charge away from. The institution he gave his career to has put him in a cage. The men that institution would describe as criminals are the ones who make sure he
Keep
eats.
them organized.
Outside the walls, the public reaction
boxes
does not
here.
line up with whatever the institution
them
was hoping
coming.
for. Money starts arriving for the family from places nobody arranged in advance. A musician with no real history of speaking out politically covers a mortgage payment that would otherwise have gone unpaid. Small fundraising events spring up around the city. People who have never met him personally make sure the household bills don't go unanswered while he's away. None of it is centrally organized. All of it adds up to the same basic message. The public is not interested in pretending he doesn't exist. What the agency wants from him, through every informal channel still available, is something small and specific. He does not have to recant publicly. He does not have to apologize on camera. They simply want a softer line, privately, an admission that perhaps the harsher word had been an overstatement, that perhaps the legal team's reading of the program held up after all. He does not give them a single syllable of it. When another intelligence community whistleblower reaches out to him by letter for advice on how to survive what is coming, his counsel is blunt and unsentimental. Do not cooperate with the Justice Department. Do not trust anyone left in your old chain of command. Take nothing back, ever, no matter what they offer you for it. He is teaching, from inside a federal cell, the exact stance the institution spent 4 years trying and failing to break out of him. For 30 months, he holds the line without bending it once. In December of 2014, while he is still serving out his sentence, a report lands on the floor of the United States Senate, 6,000 pages long, the product of what remains the longest and most expensive single investigation in the history of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Nearly every line of it lines up with the man sitting in a federal cell in Pennsylvania. Abu Zubaydah was not broken by one 35-second session. The committee's own findings put the real number at 83 separate waterboarding sessions. The interrogations, according to that same report, produced no actionable intelligence the agency had not already obtained through other, unrelated sources. The legal memos that blessed the program had been written backward, conclusions handed down first, legal justifications constructed underneath them afterward. Destroying the videotapes, in the committee's own language, amounted to obstruction of a federal investigation. The single number, Kiriakou, repeated on national television back in 2007, the only number the agency had ever actually given him, turns out to have understated the truth by a factor of more than 80. He had been right about nearly every word he said that night. He simply had not known how right he was. A few months later, in early 2015, he walks out of Loretto for the last time. Look at who actually answered for any of it, once the dust settled. The interrogators who actually carried out the waterboarding sessions were never charged. Neither were the lawyers who drafted the legal cover, nor the officer who fed hundreds of hours of evidence through an industrial shredder, nor the senior leadership that signed off on the program at every step, all the way to the top of the building. The man widely credited with designing and overseeing the program runs the Central Intelligence Agency until 2017, then walks into a second career as a paid cable news commentator, offering his opinions on the very subject he once classified as a state secret. The only American to ever serve a single day in federal prison over the United States torture program is the one officer who refused to be trained in it, and who said so, on camera, while almost everyone else around him chose to stay quiet. That imbalance is the part of this story that refuses to resolve into anything tidy or satisfying. The institution had 4 years, the full weight of the Justice Department, a largely cooperative press cycle, a stack of available statutes, and a federal prison system entirely at its disposal. What it never once managed to extract from him, in all that time, was a retraction. It is worth sitting with what that actually means. Every lever available to a government was pulled, in sequence, against one man, over a period spanning the better part of a decade, and the single outcome the institution most wanted, a quiet walking back of his own words, never arrived. Everything else it wanted, it got. The pension, gone. The career, over. Years of his children's early lives, spent behind a fence. That one thing, it never collected. Years later, in a hotel suite somewhere far from any of this, a lawyer, acting as a go-between, slides a number across the table on behalf of people who would clearly prefer this story end on different terms.
All of it comes back.
$2 million,
Your
in
family,
exchange for quietly
everything.
stepping back and not opposing a presidential pardon.
The pitch is straightforward. Drop the opposition, and in exchange, the years of lost pension, the felony record, and the reputation an indictment took from him all quietly get restored. He turns the offer down flat, without bothering to hide his contempt for it, and shows himself out of the room. There is no negotiation, no counteroffer, no pause to consider it overnight. He drives home, sits down at his own microphone, and lays out exactly what was offered to him and who offered it. naming
They
the
offered
people
me $5
involved,
million
for an
through a third
audience
party.
that now runs
They
into the
said it
millions.
would all disappear.
The pardon never
I
came.
declined.
Nobody who actually built the torture program ever stood trial for it. But somewhere back in Athens, more than 2 decades ago, a man once lowered a camera from his eye and built a folder meant to end with a body inside it. These days, it is Kiriakou who sits in front of the cameras, on his own terms, on a platform nobody at the
speaking
agency
independently
controls, telling the version of this story
And I
they
have
spent
only
more than
just
a
begun.
decade trying to make sure nobody would ever believe. They never got the one thing they were actually fighting for.